and welcome to another installment of Let's Talk About It. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, welcome. My name is Antonia. I'm one of your hosts for the podcast. Let's Talk About It is our educational mini-series here at Hope for Justice, where we sit down and talk with professionals about issues surrounding modern slavery and human trafficking. Today, I'm joined by Gillia de Boinville, co-founder of the Anti-Slavery Collective, and Ellie Russell, our UK Advocacy Manager at Hope for Justice.
Yes. So without further ado, I'd love to talk about our new segment, which is called What's New in This Space. Essentially, what we're going to be doing on our new episodes each month, we are going to be talking about what we have found really interesting in the space of anti-human trafficking and modern slavery, and talk about, some of the amazing work that charities, individuals, and general people have been doing to help end modern slavery and human trafficking. So, without further ado, what's new in this space? For me, the thing that I've really like to see that's new in this space is a little bit left field, to talk about a program that was started in Bangladesh to battle climate change induced modern slavery. Now, for Hope for Justice, we've never really worked in Bangladesh, which is why I say it's a little bit left field for us. But there was a US environmental charity or organization called Winrock, and with support from the US Department of State and local Bangladesh partner organization, this non-for-profit kicked off a flagship project nationwide titled the Bangladesh Program to End Modern Slavery, or BPEMS for short. I think it's also got a colloquial name called, forgive me if I'm saying this wrong, Agro Jatra. I think that's how you say it. It's called the Agro Jatra Project, or I'm going to stick to BPEMS because I'm probably butchering the way that you say it. It started in February, the 27th of February, at a hotel in Dhaka. So the flagship project aims to reduce the prevalence of human trafficking in farming and fishing communities, which are some of the most vulnerable to climate change across, obviously the 11 districts in Bangladesh. And I think it's absolutely phenomenal to see these organizations kind of recognize the intersectionalities between things like climate change and human trafficking, and then come up with a bespoke program that helps alleviate the pressures that causes. Because I mean, as we both know, Antonia, some of the biggest causes of human trafficking is people exploiting vulnerabilities, and when it comes to some of the drawbacks of climate change is it's pushing people to the edge of their vulnerabilities, and then it's much easier for them to be exploited by traffickers. And so for a charity like this, obviously we aren't massively clued up on the work that they've done in the past, but I think it's incredible and that they're able to take these two issues that are so linked together to provide and actually test out this program to help support the victims and potential survivors of human trafficking within fishing and farming villages. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's so cool. I think it's really interesting that you picked on this point of intersectionality and how a lot of the kind of social justice and human rights issues that we see are so connected. And by, trying to focus on one, sometimes you can actually help another cause, but sometimes you can also hinder it as well. And I find that climate change is such an interesting example of that, because, a lot of the places where you would see climate issues such as farming, fisheries, mining, all of these things that might contribute to climate change are also, like you said, rife with exploitation a lot of the time. But vice versa, sometimes some of the things that are used to fight climate change, such as the production of solar panels or electric batteries, there's also sometimes problematic exploitation there as well. So it's really interesting, I find, to look at that intersectionality aspect and really look at it with an intersectional lens of like, how can we aid both of these social justice issues and try and improve the world without hurting one or the other. You really have to look at them together. So I think that's such a fantastic project and a really good example of that, and an example of people taking that into account to actually turn that into policy and community-based change as well.
Yeah, it's really, really great. And hopefully we'll be keeping track on that program, seeing how it's going, and maybe in the next 6 months or a year after the end of season 2, we can catch up on the work that's been going on with BPEMS. So Antonia, what's new in this space? What's your interesting thing that you found out?
So something that I found out this month that was really interesting was in Portugal, there was a meeting of 25 different representatives of different councils of the Portuguese government and civil society as well. They met in Lisbon for a roundtable to discuss the country's progress in fighting human trafficking in general, what they were doing, and whether or not that was actually aligned with the recommendations set out in the Council of Europe's recommendation concerning the implementation of the Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings in Portugal specifically. So the Council of Europe does a lot of recommendations for different countries, and it will set out their recommendations per country in Europe of what's kind of happening in different areas. And this one was to do with modern slavery and human trafficking. So basically they have these recommendations, and I think the actual coming together of all the different governmental agencies and the civil society just shows real progress there. That Portugal was aligning all the different districts and all the different councils and bringing in members across both the government and community-based projects to discuss what they're doing, to discuss how to make it better, and just make sure that they're aligned with the overall strategy that was recommended by the Council of Europe. So I thought it was just really, really interesting and great to see such cross collaboration. Some of the things that they discussed was legal aid, access to compensation, the actual prosecution of human trafficking perpetrators, the process of identification of victims, and then also engaging with the private sector and how governments can help facilitate that with different NGOs as well. So I thought it was really, really great to see, that kind of cross-country collaboration, because I think at the end of the day, we need to be able to work together, whether it's different NGOs working together, different individuals, different corporations or government agencies. Just bringing everybody together is the way in which to fight this horrendous crime. So it was absolutely fantastic to see such a clear example of that in Portugal this month.
That's amazing. I love that. I mean, we've even kind of listed Alistair, who we've had in previous episodes.
Yeah.
And even Philippa as well often talks about how well connected the criminals and people who traffic individuals are, and the only way to overcome that or to beat that is to become even more connected between organizations, between governments, between entire continents. And I think it's amazing the council's discussion with Portugal doing that. We are taking those necessary steps to become far more unified, far more connected, to be able to just work together to be able to actually put an end to modern slavery and human trafficking. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is.
Today, as part of our International Women's Day campaign, we are talking about the heightened risks of modern slavery for women and girls and the obstacles that they face post-exploitation. In this episode, we want to promote the importance of survivor inclusion in society and recognise the incredible impact that organisations are having by working together. So before we get stuck into talking about this, Ali and Julia, can you give me a brief description of what your work entails?
So yeah, I'm fortunate to work at Hope for Justice and be the advocacy manager for the UK. So my work entails managing our team of independent non-slavery advocates. So they are our professionals who are working directly with survivors to provide independent advocacy and support and help them overcome the barriers that they might face on their recovery journey, making sure that they are empowered with information about their rights and entitlements and what they should have access to, and really do what we can to walk with them into whatever their preferred futures may be.
Awesome. And I'm Jules. I'm the co-founder of the Anti-Slavery Collective. I guess our story all began with women, and actually one particular woman called Aloka Mitra, who set up a foundation called the Women's Interlink Foundation in Calcutta. And I was 21 years old when I visited. I had no idea that modern slavery even existed in my lifetime. And Aloka looked after female survivors of human trafficking and kept them in a safe house, taught them a vocational skill, and gave them a kind of path back to a normal life. So women have always been at the heart of everything we do, and we're a female-led organization as well. So fast forward many years, the Anti-Slavery Collective, our mission is to raise awareness for human trafficking as a global epidemic. We do this by convening change makers, and we believe in multi-sector collaboration, because if any of us are going to realize any real change and combat modern slavery in our own lifetimes, we can only do this by working together.
Definitely. So, Juliet, you've talked a little bit about how the Anti-Slavery Collective is a female-led organisation. Could you tell me what your experience is like being a female leader in the sector?
I mean, it's the only way I know. But I've been lucky enough to work with some pretty formidable women in my life, one being my co-founder, Ushni, and other amazing kind of mentors as well, including Caroline Hockey, who is on our board and our trustee, and she's a very powerful female barrister who locks up human traffickers. She sat on the Modern Slavery Task Force. She helped draft the Modern Slavery Bill. And I think what drives us every day to make a difference is not just the female role models that we have, but also the female survivors that we've worked with and the survivor voices. And there's one particular young woman I'd like to call out called Seema, who was 16 when we met her, a survivor of modern slavery here within the UK, trafficked within the UK. And without her, I don't think our organisation would exist today. And she really inspired us to set up the collective and helped us kind of figure out our path and how we would add value. And sadly, you know, this is a hidden crime that affects women and children more than men. So it's sort of not surprising that it's quite a female-led industry as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. It's that sort of empathy that drives a lot of people as well. So Ellie, you work on a daily basis with female survivors and survivors in general, but could you tell me a little bit with your experience why you think that women and girls in particular are vulnerable to modern slavery?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to think kind of specifically about women and girls, but then also kind of recognizing the kind of vulnerabilities that are both, I guess, inherent, but then also situational, that can make kind of anybody at risk of modern slavery. So that will be things that we'll all recognize around like homelessness and poverty and things like war or family breakdown and unemployment. But I think when we kind of go beyond that and we also think about some of our kind of societal and cultural structures that will ultimately then increase those risks for women and girls. So things around where you've got kind of cultural structures where perhaps women have fewer rights, they might have limitations over their freedoms, they might not have their own voice or their own ability to make decisions or have kind of access to education. Like all of that will create a context where therefore the risk is heightened for women and girls. And I think thinking again, especially around like sexual exploitation, like again, whilst we know that that does affect men, it affects women and girls to a much greater degree. And then that will also sort of tie in again to why we're seeing more women and girls in modern slavery. So I think there are so many different pathways into exploitation that can be kind of explored and unpicked in terms of different individuals. But I think when we think kind of big picture, they're some of the key drivers, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And Julia, do you have anything you'd want to add about that with your experience?
Actually, one thing comes to mind is when the Anti-Slavery Collective did a visit to the Polish-Ukrainian border just after the war broke out, so nearly just over 2 years ago. And by definition, everyone at risk there was a woman or a child because they had conscription and no man over the age of 60 or under 18 could leave the country. So you had queues and queues and queues of women and children queuing up to leave the country to get their families to safety. And the traffickers were kind of disguised as charity workers. So they would put a high-vis jacket on with a logo of a charity, or stand there with a sign saying job in Paris or safe shelter in London. And everyone would jump in the car. And it was this awful display of preying on the vulnerable, and all women and children, and none of them had any father, grandfather, brother, uncle, or man there to help protect them. And so I think, as you know, as we look at what's happening in the world today, and the amount of displaced people and the amount of refugees there are, it is so often women and children that bear the brunt of this.
And still talking about women and children, Ellie, could you tell us a little bit more about the obstacles that women and children would face post-exploitation? You know, whether that's potential pregnancies from sexual exploitation, any issues with prosecution or accessing support?
Yeah, absolutely. So we at Hope for Justice, we work primarily with adult survivors of modern slavery, but we'll also work with young adults, so those that are kind of transitioning from 17 to 18 and moving kind of from children's services in the UK into kind of the adult space. So we can kind of talk from that experience. But I think there are many barriers, I would say, to kind of accessing support and recovery post-exploitation, some of which again will be more heightened for women and girls. So you mentioned already things like pregnancy, which could be as a result of sexual exploitation. But even if not, just thinking about childcare, like that's something that women will have to navigate in relation to whether that's accessing support services or being in a position to access employment or education opportunities. That can be a real barrier unless there is support placed around that woman and that family unit to still allow for those opportunities to be taken advantage of. I think, again, it can depend on the type of exploitation and also kind of cultural considerations. But even just thinking about sexual violence in general, we know how much kind of shame and stigma can be attached to that. And then if you bring in kind of like specifics around people's culture, then that can be a real kind of barrier to reintegrating back into your own community, for example, or your own family unit. And then as soon as you are isolated in that way, then that can also be a kind of a barrier to your recovery. So I think there's an amazing resilience that is in all the survivors that we have worked with, that you see just constantly through the fact that they have survived their exploitation and abuse, but then equally navigating systems and services and landscapes that even now in the UK don't make it easy for people to get the support that they need. So just that continued resilience that is on show is very inspiring, definitely.
Ellie, I think I've seen every single point you mentioned just then. I think I've seen all of that play out in real life and with particular survivors. And we work with a number of safe houses across the UK. And, going back to the pregnancy point, many give birth to a baby as raped victims. So they may not know who the father is, and they will give birth in a safe house, which is also incredibly traumatic. There's also a real fear of men, because often these women have been trafficked or exploited by men, and it's very hard for them to kind of build up that trust again. And so one of the safe houses we work with, they make a point of making sure they have at least one social worker that is a man to start building up that trust again, so that when the guests of the house eventually leave, they learn to view men not just as their perpetrators. I think another point that I'd love to pick up on as well was that I think we underestimate what it is to be a female victim. And there is this difference between men and women in terms of strength and power, and it's much easier as a woman to fear a man because they are physically stronger and can physically hurt you. Having said that, we also know stories of women being traffickers of other women and running brothels. So it's not, I don't want to paint this just as a gender thing, but there is definitely a slant towards that way.
And talking about resilience and the theme of the UN International Women's Day, which is inspiring inclusion as well, what do you both think that needs to be done in terms of aftercare, in terms of promoting that resilience and making sure that we can kind of dismantle these barriers as we see them come up?
Well, I think there's a big part on the kind of trauma and counselling side of it, as well as there's the physical rehabilitation of getting someone physically safe and into a safe house. That's the first step. And then there's the trauma and the mental health support. And then the bit that I'm really interested in is, how do we then help these survivors get back to a normal life as quickly as possible? And whatever that new normal looks like. And this is something we saw firsthand with the Women's Interlink Foundation that I mentioned at the beginning with Aloka. And she found that at the beginning it was just a safe house. And it was constantly the same women coming through and through the corridors, because when people went back out into the real world in Kolkata, they didn't know any different. They didn't know how to look after themselves or how to protect themselves or what to do. So they would get sucked back into the same cycle of exploitation, mostly sexual exploitation. And that's what inspired her to break the cycle. So she taught these women a vocational skill so that they could earn a wage and regain power of their lives. And I think that same model can be used across the UK and across the world, really. And often when people say, what can we do to help? It's not just about donating money to charities, but we can donate our time and we can donate our skills, and think how you can support a safe house in mentoring young women, helping them prepare for job interviews, helping them write their CV, helping them just think about what life looks like when they leave a safe house. And we all have time to spare, and we could all do more to help young women and girls reintegrate and try and get back to some kind of normal life. And I've been so humbled and blown away by the amount of survivors who then want to dedicate their time and their careers to social services as well.
And Ellie, can you tell me a little bit more about your experience with that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I totally echo that experience that you were talking about, Jules, in terms of the risk of, which was realised in that case in terms of what you've seen in Calcutta, but the risks of re-trafficking when there isn't like an alternative path for someone to go down. And I think it's thinking about what are the key building blocks that are needed for somebody to have that stability and security to even then explore those opportunities around like employment and education. And I think we're living in a really difficult time within the UK at the moment, where I work with many survivors who are in limbo because they are in systems awaiting decisions, to give them the right to work. So they may be empowered and educated and skilled and could quite easily, start a kind of a life that has, an employment within that, but actually are still prohibited from doing that. So I think it's a really tricky landscape to navigate for survivors, is that often that feeling of limbo and that feeling of kind of not having their choices that they experience within their trafficking can often even be mirrored within our own systems and structures, and that can be really re-traumatizing for people sometimes. So I think we need to see change on both kind of individual but also kind of systemic and national levels to really see kind of those systems work quicker, but also that kind of survivors can move through clear pathways and move forward and not feel kind of like they are stuck within their own kind of set of circumstances. So I think we're in a really tricky time, but I think that, as Jules was saying, that teaching people kind of valuable skills and vocations, and learning like what is it that they're passionate about. And sometimes that can take some time to explore as well. Like, I don't know if you found this, Jules, but we found sometimes working with clients, when we sort of say, like, you know, what is it that you want to do with your future, sometimes that takes some time to coax out, because they've never had the freedom before to ask themselves that question. So it's sometimes not as simple as just like,
yeah,
what do you want to do? It's sort of working with someone, isn't it, to kind of go through that.
I remember visiting a safe house once before, and this notion of choice came up, and the young girl that we were talking to she said, what is choice? She'd never had the ability to choose anything for herself in her life. And it was this whole education around choice and options and variability and control and power of her destiny, and something that we so take for granted, and something we wake up every morning and we're blessed with too much choice almost.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing that, like you said, we take for granted, and that's why it's so important to have these conversations and to raise awareness as well. Building on what you said, Ellie, about creating that clear path for survivors, I think one of the most important things that we can do as a sector is to collaborate and make it as easy as possible to reduce these barriers and to open up that path. So based on that, Julia, could you tell us a little bit more about the importance of organisations within the sector working together to ensure that survivors receive the support that's needed and don't slide through the net?
I would absolutely love to. I love this question because one of our favourite things at the Anti-Slavery Collective is to shine a light on the incredible work being done in the movement. So one safe house that we work very closely with is called Bakita House, and they look after survivors of modern slavery. My mum actually volunteers with them and helps them do the things like prepare for interviews, go and buy goods from the shop or the pharmacy. And they're an amazing, amazing blueprint for what all safe houses should be like. We've also worked with Bramber Bakehouse, which is a safe house or venue in Brighton, which teaches survivors of modern slavery how to cook and how to bake. And within that process, they are not only teaching them a skill, but they are creating a community by which they can share with other people, share with social workers. And it's a really important part of their rehabilitation. I would also point everyone towards our hashtag No More in 2024 landing page, where we challenge everyone to know more and to understand more and to learn more and to teach everyone around you about modern slavery, because it's education and knowledge that will enable all of us to help combat this as a problem. And then finally, and going back to my first point, was around multi-sector collaboration and working together and supporting each other and making sure that every industry, every government ministry, every individual, every person cares about this topic and leans into this topic and works together on this topic.
And Ellie, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree around the cross-sector collaboration, because I think we have a tendency to work in silos quite often, and actually when you think about what survivors need, that is absolutely not what is best for them. And even thinking about specifically about women and girls, in our experience, often they have suffered multiple kinds of abuse. So whilst they might be identified as a victim of modern slavery, they could quite easily be identified as a victim of sexual abuse and quite easily be identified as a victim of domestic violence. And we have different responses depending on kind of where you are identified, but actually how much kind of better it would be if there was this kind of cross-sector collaboration that would really look at the individual in a holistic sense and be like, what pathway is best for you? And it's not just because you've sort of been stamped with one label over here that you're going down a pathway that that might not be best for you. But I think also thinking kind of I guess in the kind of day-to-day and detail of a survivor journey, it can be so exhausting for individuals to have to constantly like retell their story to every single professional that they need to engage with. And that's something we're really passionate about within Hope for Justice and within the independent modern slavery advocacy model that we operate, is that idea of being in the centre with the survivor and helping them kind of encounter and work with all the different professionals and systems, but also making sure, obviously with the consent of the survivor, that those professionals and systems are therefore also working together. So it's that collaboration around, services like solicitors or mental health professionals, police, local support, housing workers, like all of those people to work together to really to understand kind of what it is that the survivor wants to achieve and how can we work together to do that. So I think there's collaboration needed at the very kind of high levels, like Jules was talking about, in terms of like government, but also in the very like day-to-day, which professionals are sitting around a table, and how we're making sure that the survivor is at the very center of that and is driving that, but also that those people are working together and working with the survivor, like on a very practical basis as well.
I couldn't agree more. That sense of community as well, and how important it is to all take care of each other and our own communities.
Definitely. I completely agree with you both as well. And my last question for you is about, for anyone listening here today, whether they are, a government worker, whether they're a professional, whether, no matter what they do, what can they do to stop modern slavery as an individual?
Sure. I think it goes back to the point that you were raising before, Jules, about education. I think we have all been that person at any one point in time that like didn't know that modern slavery was an issue. Like everybody has that learning moment of realizing like that it's an issue, and then also like the extent of the issue. So I think that's huge, and I think that's equally I was going to say equally huge, which doesn't really make sense, but that is like equally as important around, especially with like young people, like within our school system. I think the education there, and also to educate on the risks of, potential pathways into modern slavery around, especially with our young people, around grooming and things like that. So I think education is key. And then, I think understanding what your own skills are, what your own capacity is, and thinking about how you can kind of contribute what is within your hand to kind of what is going on within the sector.
Yeah, and like you say, donating skills in kind, whether that's time, whether that's knowledge. There's so many other ways you can donate and support outside of money. So that is one thing I would reiterate. I'd also echo the education point, and always encourage people to ask the question. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And don't be afraid to question and query things. And there are some amazing apps out there. One that comes to mind is Stop the Traffic Stop app, where you can report something suspicious. So if you're worried about, you're not sure, and maybe you don't want to phone the police or cause a drama, you can just log some suspicious activity using the Stop app, and they will go and investigate it. So I think absolutely, Ellie, as you say, it's education, ask the question, and I think it's taking responsibility. We all owe it to our communities, to our countries, to this world, to rid this world of modern slavery by 2030 in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's not going to happen overnight. And it's only going to happen if we all work together and play our part and take a bit of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thank you so much for such an insightful and interesting conversation, and for your time here today. Thank you to everybody listening, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you, Antonia.
I needed to earn enough money for my daughter for her school, and I was told about a good job in England, so me and 2 others took it. We were picked up and driven to a port. We went on a ferry to England. When we arrived, they said we were going to work for good money, so we worked very hard for long hours to finish the job well. But when we finished, we never got paid. Instead, we were locked up. They forced us to do more work. They would beat us and threaten us if we didn't finish the work. We couldn't go anywhere because they took our passports, ID, and money. We were stuck. I felt hopeless, totally powerless. At this time, I knew I was a slave. I felt very sick, hungry, and tired all the time. I was sold from person to person, bartered for right in front of my face. I heard a man say I wasn't even worth 300. I felt worthless, like rubbish on the floor. I wished that I could die, that it could all be behind. I finally decided I would rather be killed trying to escape than stay. I knew one man who lived a long way away. I had no money or transport, so I had to walk as fast as I could, or they would catch me. My legs are bad because they beat me, but I had to keep going. I walked for 10 days straight with no stopping. Look, these are the shoes I found. They are the wrong size, but they are all I had. When I was walking, all I could think about was the traffickers. They are chasing me. They will find me. I was very worried. I thought of my daughter too. I had let her down so much. I felt shameful. Hope for Justice have been very good to me. I didn't expect any help. I thought I was finished. I am so happy to be free, to be alive.
Thank you so much, Julia and Ellie, for that insightful and interesting conversation. And of course, thank you for tuning in as always. And if you have any comments or questions about this topic or any of the other topics that we've covered in previous episodes, please let us know, as we'd love to hear them. If you're enjoying this series, please let us know wherever you're watching. We've got more episodes coming soon, so stay tuned. But for now, see you next time.